History remembers many rulers, many kings, and many conquerors, but very few individuals have left a mark so powerful that their story continues to fascinate the world thousands of years later. Among those rare figures stands a queen whose intelligence, ambition, and determination changed the course of history. Her name was Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, the ruler of one of the richest lands in the ancient world, and a woman whose influence would reach far beyond the borders of her kingdom. But Cleopatra's story was not simply one of beauty and power. It was a story of survival, a story of political genius, and a story of a woman who had to fight constantly to protect her throne in one of the most dangerous political eras in ancient history. By the time Cleopatra began to establish herself as a true ruler, the world around her was already shifting dramatically. The Mediterranean region, once dominated by many competing kingdoms, was slowly coming under the shadow of one rising power: Roman Republic. Rome was expanding at a remarkable pace. Its armies had conquered vast territories across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Roman generals were becoming incredibly powerful, and political rivalries inside Rome were growing more intense every year. For smaller kingdoms like Egypt, this new reality created both opportunity and danger. Egypt was not just another kingdom. It was one of the most valuable regions in the ancient world. The Nile River provided fertile land that produced enormous quantities of grain. Egyptian trade routes connected Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean world. Gold, luxury goods, and knowledge flowed through its cities. Whoever controlled Egypt controlled wealth, and wealth meant power. Cleopatra understood this better than most rulers of her time. Unlike many leaders who depended solely on armies and military strength, Cleopatra relied heavily on diplomacy, intelligence, and strategy. She was highly educated. Ancient historians describe her as someone who spoke many languages and had deep knowledge of philosophy, science, and politics. While many rulers depended on translators, Cleopatra was able to communicate directly with ambassadors and foreign leaders. This ability gave her a unique advantage. She could build alliances, negotiate agreements, and influence powerful men without barriers. But even with these talents, Cleopatra faced enormous challenges. Her position as queen was never fully secure. The royal family of Egypt, known as the Ptolemaic dynasty, had a long history of internal conflict. Brothers fought against sisters, rulers fought against rivals, and betrayals inside the palace were common. Cleopatra herself had already experienced these struggles. At times, she had been forced into exile. At times, she had faced enemies within her own family who wanted to remove her from power. Every decision she made carried risk. Yet Cleopatra possessed something many of her enemies underestimated: patience. She understood that power was not always won on the battlefield. Sometimes power was won through alliances, sometimes through timing, and sometimes through influence. The city of Alexandria, where Cleopatra ruled, was one of the greatest centers of knowledge and culture in the ancient world. Its famous library attracted scholars from across the Mediterranean. Philosophers, mathematicians, scientists, and historians gathered there to exchange ideas. This environment shaped Cleopatra's thinking. She did not see herself merely as a ruler of Egypt. She saw herself as a player in a much larger political world. And that world was becoming increasingly dominated by Rome. Within the Roman Republic, political tensions were reaching dangerous levels. Powerful generals competed with each other for influence. Civil wars erupted. Alliances formed and collapsed rapidly. One of the most important figures in this unstable Roman political landscape was Julius Caesar. Caesar was a brilliant military commander who had conquered vast territories, including Gaul. But he was also a controversial political figure. Many Romans admired him. Many others feared him. His growing power worried the Roman Senate, and political conflict between Caesar and his rivals eventually pushed Rome toward civil war. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he did not come simply as a visitor. He came as a man whose decisions could reshape the entire region, and Cleopatra understood the importance of that moment. At the time, Egypt itself was facing internal conflict regarding the throne. Cleopatra needed support. She needed a powerful ally, and Caesar needed stability in Egypt. Their meeting would become one of the most famous encounters in ancient history. According to historical accounts, Cleopatra arranged to meet Caesar in a dramatic and unforgettable way. Legend says she had herself secretly brought into the palace wrapped inside a carpet. When the carpet was unrolled before Caesar, Cleopatra emerged. Whether this story is completely accurate or partly symbolic, it perfectly captures the spirit of Cleopatra's personality. She was bold, she was fearless, and she knew how to create unforgettable moments. Caesar immediately recognized her intelligence. She was not simply asking for help. She was offering partnership. With Caesar's backing, Cleopatra was able to strengthen her claim to the throne and remove several rivals who threatened her rule. This alliance transformed the political balance in Egypt, but it also created new complications, because Cleopatra was no longer simply the queen of Egypt. She had become connected to the most powerful man in Rome. Their relationship attracted enormous attention. Some saw it as a powerful alliance, others saw it as dangerous. Roman politicians began worrying about Cleopatra's growing influence. They feared that Caesar might become too closely tied to Egypt. Rumors began spreading across Rome. Some claimed that Caesar wanted to make Cleopatra queen of Rome. Others feared that Egypt might gain too much influence over Roman politics. Whether these fears were exaggerated or not, they reveal something important. Cleopatra had become a central figure in global politics. Her decisions could affect not only Egypt, but also the future of Rome itself. For Cleopatra, this moment represented both triumph and danger. Her influence had grown dramatically, but powerful enemies were also watching. The world of ancient politics was ruthless. Alliances could collapse overnight, friends could become enemies, and conspiracies could emerge where least expected. Soon, events in Rome would prove just how fragile power could be. Because while Cleopatra was strengthening her position in Egypt, a deadly conspiracy was already forming in the heart of Rome. A conspiracy that would soon lead to one of the most shocking events in ancient history. And when that moment arrived, it would once again change Cleopatra's destiny forever. As Cleopatra strengthened her position in Egypt, her influence was beginning to stretch far beyond the borders of her kingdom. She was no longer just a queen, ruling a distant land along the Nile. Slowly but surely, she was becoming a figure whose presence and decisions were shaping the politics of the Mediterranean world. At the center of this growing influence stood her alliance with Julius Caesar. Caesar was not merely a powerful general. By this time, he had become one of the most dominant political figures in Rome. His victories in war had earned him immense popularity among the Roman people, but his rapid rise also created deep fear among the Roman elite. Many senators believed Caesar was gaining too much authority. Rome had been governed as a republic for centuries, a system that rejected kings and absolute rulers. The idea that one man might hold unlimited power frightened many Roman politicians. Yet Caesar continued to expand his influence. During this period, Cleopatra made a decision that would further strengthen her position and shape how the world viewed her. She traveled to Rome. This was not a simple diplomatic visit. It was a bold political statement. When Cleopatra arrived in Rome, she brought with her the wealth, elegance, and grandeur of Egypt. Her presence immediately captured the attention of the Roman public. The Romans had long admired Egyptian culture. Stories of Egypt's ancient temples, golden treasures, and mysterious traditions had fascinated Roman citizens for generations. But seeing the Queen of Egypt in person was something entirely different. Cleopatra was unlike any woman Rome had seen. Ancient writers describe her not simply as beautiful, but as charismatic and captivating. Her intelligence, her confidence, and her ability to speak with authority impressed those who met her. She understood how to command attention. In many ways, Cleopatra represented the power and sophistication of a civilization far older than Rome itself. Yet her presence in Rome also created controversy. Some Roman leaders were uneasy about the relationship between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. They feared that Egypt's queen might influence Caesar's decisions or gain too much control over Roman affairs. Rumors spread rapidly through the city. Some claimed that Caesar intended to give Cleopatra special privileges. Others whispered that he might even crown himself king, something that Roman tradition strongly rejected. To many Romans, the idea of monarchy was deeply offensive. The Roman Republic had been founded centuries earlier after the overthrow of a king. Since that time, Roman political culture had been built around the belief that no single ruler should hold absolute authority. But Caesar's growing power made many people wonder whether those traditions were beginning to collapse. Meanwhile, Cleopatra continued to strengthen her position as Egypt's ruler. She gave birth to a son who was widely believed to be the child of Caesar. The boy would later be known as Caesarion. For Cleopatra, this child represented more than a personal relationship. He represented a powerful political connection between Egypt and Rome. Through Caesarion, Cleopatra could claim a link to Rome's most powerful leader. But in Rome, political tension was reaching dangerous levels. Powerful senators were becoming increasingly alarmed by Caesar's authority. They believed he was moving too close to becoming a dictator. Secret meetings began to take place among Caesar's opponents. These men believed they were defending the Roman Republic. They convinced themselves that drastic action was necessary. Among the conspirators were several well-known Roman leaders, including Marcus Junius Brutus. Ironically, Brutus had once been trusted by Caesar himself, yet he became one of the central figures in the conspiracy. The plot against Caesar slowly took shape. The conspirators planned to assassinate him inside the Roman Senate, a location that symbolized the power of the Republic. Their goal was to eliminate Caesar before he could gain even greater control over Rome. And on a dramatic day in 44 BC, their plan unfolded. Inside the Senate chamber, Caesar was surrounded by senators who suddenly turned against him. Daggers were drawn, blades struck repeatedly, and in a matter of moments, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world lay dead. This event became known as the assassination of Julius Caesar. The murder shocked Rome, but it did not bring peace. Instead, it plunged the Republic into chaos. Violence erupted across the city. Supporters of Caesar demanded revenge. His enemies struggled to control the situation they had created. The Roman Republic was entering a new and dangerous phase. For Cleopatra, the consequences were immediate and serious. Her strongest ally was gone. The political balance that had protected her position was suddenly destroyed. Remaining in Rome became extremely dangerous. Cleopatra quickly realized that the city was no longer safe for her or for her son. She made the decision to leave. Returning to Egypt, Cleopatra once again faced the challenge of protecting her throne in a world dominated by Roman power. But she was not defeated. If anything, the crisis strengthened her determination. Cleopatra had survived palace conspiracies, exile, and political betrayal. She understood that the world was changing, and she would need to adapt once again. Meanwhile, in Rome, the struggle for power had only just begun. After Caesar's death, several powerful leaders began competing to control the Roman state. One of them was a young man named Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. Another was a seasoned general and loyal supporter of Caesar, Mark Antony. These two men would soon become central figures in Rome's future. Their rivalry would eventually reshape the entire Mediterranean world. And once again, Cleopatra would find herself drawn into the center of that conflict, because her destiny was no longer connected only to Egypt. It was tied to the fate of Rome itself. And the next chapter of her story would introduce a new alliance, one that would become even more dramatic, even more controversial, and even more powerful than the one she had shared with Caesar. Her path was about to cross with Mark Antony, and together, they would form one of the most legendary partnerships in ancient history. But with great power always comes great risk, and the decisions Cleopatra would soon make would lead her toward a conflict that would determine the future of Egypt forever. The death of Julius Caesar changed the political landscape of the Mediterranean world almost overnight. What had once been a powerful and relatively stable alliance between Rome and Egypt suddenly collapsed into uncertainty. Rome, the greatest power in the known world, now faced a dangerous power vacuum. And whenever power becomes empty, ambitious men rise to claim it. Across the Roman Republic, leaders began positioning themselves for control. Political alliances formed quickly, but they were fragile and unstable. Rome was no longer simply a republic guided by laws and tradition. It had become a battlefield of powerful personalities. Among the men competing for control were two figures who would soon dominate Roman politics. One was Mark Antony, a fearless military commander and one of Caesar's closest allies. The other was Octavian, the young adopted son and heir of Caesar. Though Octavian was still young, he possessed sharp political instincts and a deep understanding of Roman power struggles. Mark Antony, on the other hand, was already famous as a warrior and general. The stage was set for a struggle that would shape the future of Rome. Meanwhile, far from the chaos of Rome, Cleopatra had returned to Egypt. For the Queen of Egypt, Caesar's death was both a personal tragedy and a political crisis. Her most powerful protector had vanished, and the Roman world was now dangerously unstable. But Cleopatra had survived difficult situations before. She understood that the survival of Egypt depended on her ability to navigate Roman politics once again, and soon an opportunity appeared. Mark Antony, now one of the most powerful men in Rome, summoned Cleopatra to meet him in the city of Tarsus. This meeting would become one of the most dramatic moments in ancient history. Cleopatra did not travel quietly. She understood the importance of image and symbolism. She knew that first impressions could shape political alliances. So when she arrived in Tarsus, she made sure the world would never forget it. Her ship sailed up the river like a floating palace. Its sails were said to be purple, the color of royalty. Perfume filled the air. Musicians played soft melodies. Golden decorations reflected the sunlight. The scene looked less like a diplomatic meeting and more like the arrival of a goddess. Ancient historians later wrote that Cleopatra appeared dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, surrounded by servants who looked like mythical attendants. Whether every detail of this story is historically accurate or partly exaggerated by later writers, one thing is certain: her entrance was unforgettable. When Mark Antony saw Cleopatra, he was deeply impressed. But Cleopatra's goal was not simply to impress him. She was demonstrating something important. Egypt was wealthy, Egypt was powerful, and Egypt could be a valuable ally. During their meetings, Cleopatra used her intelligence, charm, and political understanding to build a strong connection with Antony. The two quickly formed a powerful partnership, like her earlier alliance with Caesar. This relationship combined both politics and personal attraction. Together, Cleopatra and Antony began shaping the future of the Eastern Mediterranean. Antony controlled large portions of the Roman military, while Cleopatra controlled one of the richest kingdoms in the ancient world. For a time, their combined influence was enormous. Cleopatra supported Antony's military campaigns and provided financial resources that helped strengthen his position in Rome's ongoing political struggles. In return, Antony supported Cleopatra's authority in Egypt and helped secure her power in the region. But not everyone in Rome approved of this alliance. In fact, many Roman politicians viewed it with suspicion and hostility. To them, Antony appeared to be drifting away from Roman traditions. They believed he was becoming too influenced by Egypt and its queen. These accusations became powerful political weapons. In Rome, Antony's rival Octavian began using propaganda to attack him. Octavian portrayed Antony as a man who had abandoned Rome for the luxury and influence of a foreign queen. He spread stories claiming that Cleopatra wanted to control Rome itself. These claims were exaggerated, but they were effective. Roman citizens began to question Antony's loyalty. The political conflict between Antony and Octavian grew deeper. What had started as a rivalry between two leaders slowly transformed into something much larger. It became a struggle for control of the Roman world. Cleopatra now stood at the center of this conflict. Her alliance with Antony made her one of the most powerful women in the Mediterranean, but it also made her a target. In Roman propaganda, Cleopatra was portrayed as a dangerous and manipulative queen who threatened Rome's independence. Yet the reality was far more complex. Cleopatra was not trying to conquer Rome. She was trying to protect Egypt. For centuries, Egypt had been an independent and powerful kingdom. But now Rome's expanding influence threatened that independence. Cleopatra understood that alliances with Roman leaders might be the only way to preserve Egypt's sovereignty. With Antony's support, Cleopatra's political power reached its peak. Together they ruled vast territories across the eastern Mediterranean. But while their power was growing in the east, Octavian was growing stronger in the west. The Roman world was slowly dividing into two opposing camps. War was becoming inevitable. The final confrontation between Antony and Octavian would soon arrive. And when that moment came, Cleopatra would face the most dangerous challenge of her life. The future of Egypt, the fate of Rome, and the legacy of one of history's most remarkable queens would all be decided on the battlefield. And that battlefield would soon be known as one of the most decisive moments in ancient history, the Battle of Actium. By the time the alliance between Mark Antony and Cleopatra reached its peak, the Roman world had already begun dividing into two opposing powers. On one side stood Antony and Cleopatra, controlling vast territories in the eastern Mediterranean. On the other side stood Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, whose influence in Rome continued to grow stronger every year. The rivalry between these leaders was no longer just political. It had become personal, and personal conflicts often lead to the most destructive wars. Octavian understood that defeating Antony on the battlefield would not be enough. First, he needed to weaken Antony's reputation in Rome. So he launched a powerful propaganda campaign. Roman citizens were told that Antony had fallen under the control of a foreign queen. They were told that Cleopatra wanted to dominate Rome and destroy Roman traditions. These stories were exaggerated and often false, but they spread quickly across the Roman world. For many Romans, the conflict was no longer simply Antony versus Octavian. It was Rome versus Egypt. Meanwhile, Cleopatra continued supporting Antony with Egypt's enormous wealth. The Kingdom of Egypt was still one of the richest lands in the Mediterranean. Its grain fed millions of people, and its gold helped finance armies and fleets. With Cleopatra's resources, Antony built a massive military force. War was becoming unavoidable. Finally, in 31 BC, the two sides met in one of the most famous naval battles in history, the Battle of Actium. The battle took place off the western coast of Greece. Huge fleets gathered on both sides. Hundreds of ships filled the sea as soldiers and commanders prepared for a confrontation that would determine the future of the Roman world. Octavian's forces were led by his brilliant general Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, a skilled naval strategist. Antony's fleet was large and powerful, but the situation was complicated. The combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra faced logistical challenges, internal tensions, and declining morale. As the battle began, the sea turned into chaos. Warships rammed into each other. Arrows and burning weapons filled the air. The clash of metal echoed across the waves. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain. But gradually, Octavian's forces began gaining the advantage. Agrippa's naval tactics proved more effective. Antony's fleet started losing formation. Ships were damaged. Commanders struggled to maintain control. Then something unexpected happened. Cleopatra's ships, positioned behind Antony's fleet, suddenly broke through the battle lines and began sailing away from the battlefield. Historians still debate exactly why this happened. Some believe Cleopatra feared that the battle had already been lost. Others think the move may have been part of a strategic withdrawal plan. But whatever the reason, Antony saw Cleopatra's ships leaving. And in a moment that would change history, he made a dramatic decision. Instead of continuing the battle, Antony followed Cleopatra, leaving the battlefield behind. Without their leader, Antony's remaining forces collapsed. Octavian's fleet claimed victory. The Battle of Actium had been decided. It was one of the most important turning points in ancient history, because after this defeat, the fate of Egypt was almost sealed. Octavian now held the advantage. He began preparing his final campaign. Within a year, Octavian's armies marched toward Egypt itself. For Cleopatra, the situation had become extremely dangerous. Her kingdom was now facing the unstoppable military power of Rome. Antony attempted to rebuild his strength. But the defeat at Actium had damaged both his reputation and his army. When Octavian's forces finally reached Egypt, the conflict ended quickly. Antony's remaining troops surrendered or fled. Realizing that the war had been lost, Antony fell into despair. Believing that Cleopatra had already taken her own life, Antony made a tragic decision. He chose to end his life rather than be captured by his enemies. Soon after, Cleopatra herself faced an impossible choice. She knew that Octavian planned to take her to Rome as a prisoner, displaying her as a symbol of victory. For a queen who had ruled Egypt with pride and intelligence, such humiliation was unbearable. According to ancient accounts, Cleopatra chose to end her own life. Legend says she allowed herself to be bitten by a venomous snake known as an asp. Whether this exact story is true or not remains debated by historians. But Cleopatra died in 30 BC. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries finally came to an end. Egypt was no longer an independent kingdom. It became a province of Rome. Meanwhile, Octavian returned to Rome as the undisputed ruler of the Roman world. Within a few years, he would become known as Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Roman Republic was gone. The Roman Empire had begun. But Cleopatra's story did not end with her death. For more than 2,000 years, her name has continued to inspire fascination, debate, and legend. Some remember her as a brilliant strategist. Others see her as a tragic queen who fought desperately to protect her kingdom. But one thing is certain: Cleopatra was far more than a beautiful queen from ancient stories. She was one of the most intelligent and influential rulers of her time, a woman who stood at the crossroads of two great civilizations, a queen whose decisions shaped the destiny of Egypt and Rome, and a legend whose story still captivates the world today. But Cleopatra's life still holds many mysteries, secrets about her rise to power, hidden political strategies, and the truth behind the legends that history has told about her. And in the next episode, we will explore those mysteries in even greater detail to discover the next chapter of this incredible story. Watch episode 4 on VOA TV History and Mystery YouTube channel.